Is Earl Thomas holding out? Tom, 4 heads here. He's doing it.
It's official, and this is a big deal for the Seahawks because they're kind of in an interesting spot because Earl Thomas has made it pretty clear he wants to get paid, and I will always respect players who want to do that, especially when you're in the last year of your deal. And Earl Thomas, as of right now, Cam, is not a top 5 highest paid safety in the NFL, which is weird, right?
It's interesting.
Cam Chancellor's making more than Earl Thomas. Now, the Seahawks had said, oh, he's not going to sit out, which we know is clearly not the case anymore. So it's going to cost probably $13 million a year to land Earl Thomas around that Eric Berry mark. You know, Joyner is there on the tag. Harrison Smith is now all of a sudden a very team-friendly deal at safety.
Honestly.
Rashad Jones, not so much. Chancellor's, his future is in doubt. So all of a sudden, the Seahawks, if they lose Earl Thomas, Cam, they have lost a ton at safety. Or at their defense overall. Cliff Averill is gone. You know, Michael Bennett is gone. Mm-hmm. Sherman's gone.
Richardson.
Chancellor is a big question mark. Richardson is gone. All of a sudden, you lost half your starting defense there. So Earl Thomas's future, because of this holdout, he's made it very clear he just wants to get paid. And it seems like Seattle and Thomas are at very differing points with where they sit right now with their overall marks with what their future looks like right now.
If you were general manager John Schneider, you were either really PO'd because Schneider told everybody that the Thomas camp told him that he was not holding out, or Schneider lied to the entire media to kind of, I guess, speak it into existence that Earl Thomas would not hold out.
Maybe he wanted to believe that Earl Thomas was not going to hold out.
But let me tell you, the Seattle Seahawks leadership cannot screw this up, Tom. They have to figure this out because if the Seattle Seahawks go into 2019 with no extension for Earl Thomas, hello Cowboys.
Oh, yeah.
Honestly.
Oh, yeah. And if they lose Earl Thomas, they're only going to get a third-round pick back in exchange via the supplemental draft. Mm-hmm. Or not supplemental draft, excuse me, the compensatory picks there. I got my mind on supplemental draft coming up later.
Of course.
They're actually players
you draft maniac there.
They're actually decent players this year, and I'm excited.
Tom Downey, ladies and gentlemen, only the best. All right, so who are the top 5 teams that could trade for Earl Thomas? We've got our list after a short word from our friends at Man Crates.
Man Crates, awesome gifts for men in real wooden crates, wrapped in a cocoon of duct tape, or housed in ammo cans that are virtually indestructible. Some gifts he'll get to assemble himself. Some gifts you'll beg him to share. And some gifts are sealed inside layers of rock-solid concrete. Gifts guys love, from grilling gear to old-school video games and more. Man Crates, awesome gifts for men.
And once again, thank you to Man Crates for coming along for the ride here on NFL Daily. All right, Tom, let's talk about him. Earl Thomas, he's holding out. He wants a contract extension. Let's say Seattle tries to shop him.
Trade machine time?
Trade machine
time. All right, so we got a lot of different stuff that we can go to here. We'll get to the exact details in a little bit, but I want to kind of break down the teams that just missed out on this list here. If Earl Thomas is actually available on the trade block, and I think that to an extent he is, there are a lot of different teams that could have varying levels of interest. So some teams that miss the cut here. The Colts need a safety, I think, but Malik Hooker's already there as their free safety. You don't want both those guys. Doesn't make enough sense for the Colts. The San Francisco 49ers would love to get Earl Thomas, right?
That'd be interesting. Hey, they have salary cap space, they have some draft capital, and Richard Sherman's there.
Seattle will never trade him to the San Francisco 49ers.
They
will never do that. Minnesota would be awesome. Harrison Smith and Earl Thomas together?
It's unfair.
The money doesn't quite work out. You got a lot of big name players from Minnesota about to hit the open market next year. They can't afford to bring in Earl Thomas and give him a big fat contract. So it'd be great. Doesn't quite work out. I really thought about a Packers trade centered around Clinton Dix.
Wow.
Didn't think it made enough sense for either side, and I decided to not go in that route. The Giants I really considered, but the issue for me, Cam, is that the money, again, Odell Beckham and Landon Collins are going to be free agents next year.
That's fair.
You can't pay all three of those guys with the way the Giants salary cap is currently worked out.
All right, so let's get inside the top 5 here, Tom. We'll start things off with the Kansas City Chiefs. They could make a move for Earl Thomas, so you're telling me it could be Earl Thomas and Eric Berry?
How fun would that be? And you go ahead and take a look at overall. This is what I would think the trade could be here for the Chiefs. And I'll mention this right now before Seahawks fans get all upset at me. This is kind of the best you're going to get. If you can get a second-round pick for Earl Thomas, I think that's the max right now. Because no one's trading a first-round pick for him.
Tom, the 12s are very offensive.
But look at what Marcus Peters got. And this is Earl Thomas, who's older and also about to get a big fat contract. Marcus Peters got a 4th and a future 2nd. That's kind of, I think, the best that you're going to hope to get there. So, and you got to pay him. And NFL teams, we know, are very hesitant to give out draft capital and big money. So I think it's a 2nd-round pick, either the lesser version between the Chiefs don't pick and the Rams pick via that Marcus Peters trade. Probably end up being the Rams, so you're getting a late 2nd-round pick. But in terms of a need, the Chiefs need it. Like Eric Berry and a bunch of nobodies. So if I am the Chiefs, I'm absolutely going after a guy like Earl Thomas. The money is a little bit of an issue. It's not an ideal scenario. I think that they would look to try and get somebody might have to go down the road because Earl Thomas is going to be another $13 million. Now, you can afford it. They don't have that many free agents, and this is where having a rookie contract quarterback helps out in a big way, Cam, because you're not paying Patrick Mahomes big money.
I think we should also note as we go through these teams here for Earl Thomas, the safety market in free agency has been stagnant. Eric Reed is still without a job. Kenny Vaccaro is still unemployed. And Trey Boston, probably the best of the crop here, still looking for a team as well. So that means teams aren't going to give up a lot, Tom, for Earl Thomas.
I know that Seahawks fans are not going to like this, and I apologize for it, but you're not going to get what you would otherwise think you would land in a trade. You're not going to get the actual value of a player because that's just not how trades work in the NFL, unfortunately.
All right, so the Kansas City Chiefs are there at number 5 here on the list. Let's take a look at team number 4. Tom, if this happens, you're not throwing more than 80 yards against the LA Chargers. I'm sorry, you're just not. That secondary is elite, especially at the cornerback position. If you insert Earl Thomas, wow.
It's a fun group right there. So I actually like it a lot for LA, even though there are some big potential roadblocks here. Now, you bring in the secondary all of a sudden, Cam, you're looking at Casey Hayward, Jason Ferrett, Williams, Derwin at the strong safety, and Earl Thomas at free safety. This is the best secondary in the NFL, right?
No doubt.
Like, as long as everyone's healthy, right?
Right.
So here's how I could view this trade going down. And this is a conditional 3rd-round pick going to Seattle. If the Chargers win the AFC, it jumps up to a 2nd-round pick. So it ends up being, in reality, you're still getting in a late 2nd, early to mid-3rd, and you're getting a safety. I originally thought about Jaleel Adai. I thought about some of the other safeties the Chargers have. Adrian Phillips, I went, you know what, let's just give them the young, cheap guy. Let's give them Rayshawn Jenkins, a potential piece for them to build with. I'll swap out any safety you guys want that's not named Derwin James instead, if that's the route that you want to go there. The issue, I guess maybe the biggest issue, is that money is a bit of an issue. You're looking ahead, the Chargers are hanging around $20 million. You can get up to $30 if you cut guys like Corey Luigi and other players, but Verrett is also a free agent. So that could be an issue for the LA Chargers there. But I love Derwin James. If you can put him at strong safety, though, that's still going to be his best spot, I think, in the NFL, and that's not necessarily a negative. But you bring him in, you put Derwin and Earl Thomas together, that's a really good grouping there.
Like I said, you're not throwing against this team. You're just not. So, hey, if the Chargers make a move and get Earl Thomas, watch out AFC. Now, Tom, just for clarification there in terms of the draft pick, when you say win the AFC, do you mean number 1 overall seed or win the conference, the AFC Championship?
Win the AFC Championship.
Okay, got it.
Good point to clarify, though. I appreciate that.
All right.
Of course, you can adjust the protections if you want. Maybe it's just making the playoffs, so you're kind of locking yourself into more of a top 75 pick overall. But I think if you're the Seahawks, if you were to actually trade Earl Thomas, the most you might get is a 2nd or 3rd round pick and maybe another young safety to help kind of build around. But you're not going to get the actual in a bubble value of Earl Thomas because that's just not how NFL teams operate.
All right, so the Chargers are there at number 4. Let's take a look at the Arizona Cardinals at number 3 here. Tyrann Mathieu is no longer there. And they have Budda Baker. They have a couple other pieces that I like in that secondary. Antoine Bethea is there as well. But Earl Thomas would be easily the best secondary player for this team if he goes there.
Look, you look at what Arizona lost this year in Tyrann Mathieu, and who did they bring in at safety to help out? Nobody. Antoine Bethea, Budda Baker, and then Rudy Ford is your top backup. It's not the route that I would go. So if I'm Arizona and you actually think you're in position to win right now, which I don't know if you actually are, then it makes more sense to go do it. So you bring in Earl Thomas, you give a 3rd round pick with lesser conditions that it becomes a 2nd if Arizona makes the playoff because I don't think they're going to, so they'd be a little bit more willing to lessen the protections overall on that conditional third-round pick. You bring him in, and again, here's kind of the issue for Seattle. I don't know if they'd ever trade him to Arizona, where they trade him in division. They would be more willing to do it for Arizona than San Francisco.
No doubt.
Because I don't think Seattle fears Arizona all that much in the same way that they would potentially fear San Francisco. I even thought about the Rams too, Cam.
Wow, Tom.
You're
out there,
with
man.
some trade involving LaMarcus Joyner, but I thought it got a little too complicated and weird overall in the end. But I think it'd be a fun trade for Arizona. You can get to about $55 million this offseason for the Cardinals. Of course, Larry Fitzgerald, Mike Iupati, and Danny Buchanan are all free agents. You can make all those guys fit. But there's a reason they're third. I think in reality, Cam, there are two teams that we'll get to here in just a second that make a lot more sense for Earl Thomas than anybody else out there.
All right, so Seahawks trade Earl Thomas to the Cardinals. Who says no to that? Cardinals, Seahawks, neither team or both teams just straight up say no.
I am very curious what you guys vote, so keep those votes flowing. I always love to play, Cam, who says no.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite games to play out there.
All right, let's go to number 2 here on the list. We've got the Houston Texans checking in, and really tough story, first of all, with Andre Hall being diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma there, and Houston's going to have to figure out the future of Hall. And then going off of that, maybe they mix in a little Kareem Jackson at safety if Hall is out for a long period of time. That's something that I was reading earlier today. So
interesting idea.
We'll see.
Interesting idea. I would keep him at corner, but that's an interesting idea. I think Justin Reed might play a bigger role.
Definitely.
But with Hall now dealing with lymphoma, I think Houston all of a sudden actually makes some good sense for Earl Thomas. He gets to go to the home state more or less, back to the state of Texas, even though it's not quite the same as Dallas, which we'll get to. Don't worry, guys.
We'll get there.
You put Earl Thomas and Tyrann Mathieu in that secondary, Cam. That's a fun group right there, man. Like, that is a really good 1-2 punch there. Aaron Colvin becomes your slot corner. Joseph Jackson and Kevin Johnson as well, your top 3 outside guys. That's a fun trio. So here's my trade offer for Houston and Seattle. Houston, of course, gets Earl Thomas. Seattle gets a second-round pick, the worst between either Houston or their own second-round pick, and it could go back to them. Now, I think what Seattle's doing here again, both these picks kind of like our 5th one there with the Chiefs. You get the lesser of the 2 picks, so it's probably a back half of the second round. But Houston, Cam, has the money to pull this off. They're going to be at about $61 million next year, and they can easily get to another $10 million by cutting guys, by making other roster moves. The flip side is Kareem Jackson, Clowney, Mathieu, and Bernard McKinney are all free agents next year. So the money is a little bit of a game there. You might have to say goodbye to someone like a Kareem Jackson potentially, and then go draft a corner early. But I kind of like this idea if I'm Houston. You go all in right now with the rookie deal. You're saving a lot of money at quarterback with Deshaun Watson. You give up a second pick. You still have a second-round pick. And you land Earl Thomas, Cam.
We're talking about a Houston team that probably could have a pretty legit secondary if they can bring in Earl Thomas. And that mixes in, like you mentioned, with the Honey Badger. Of course, they have Aaron Coleman as well. And when you talk about this Houston Texans team here, I think Justin Reed will have a nice impact coming on over via the draft. Mm-hmm. Jonathan Joseph is still a nice veteran presence as well. So, sneaky defense if the Houston Texans get Earl Thomas.
I think it's actually a very good one, especially, Camp, if J.J. Watt stays healthy.
Whitney Merciless, Jadeveon Clowney, these guys make plays, like you said.
At all 3 levels of the field. I like that a lot.
All right, so the Houston Texans could be a team that may bring in Earl Thomas. And let's take a look at the next team here on the list. And checking in at number 1, we do have the Dallas Cowboys.
Like, duh, right?
Obviously.
Duh.
Obviously, Tom.
Like, who else was going to be at the first spot? Like, the Earl Thomas, the Cowboys trade rumors, or any rumor around it, will not stop until Earl Thomas signs a multi-year deal with the Seattle Seahawks or actually ends up in Dallas. We know the 2 sides had trade talks during the NFL draft. And what I believe happened, there have been some differing reports. I think what happened was that Seattle might have had more interest in doing the second-round pick, but when Connor Williams was on the board, the Cowboys said, we got to take this guy. And then the Cowboys did call in round 3. And they said, hey, we'll give you our 3rd-round pick for Earl Thomas, and Seattle ghosted them. But things have changed a little bit now, Cam, because of the holdout. It's not the same for Seattle because the chance that Earl Thomas leaves in free agency has indeed increased. So that's why all these trades we've had, Cam, it's at least a third-round pick. Because no matter what, Seattle will get that, you would assume, in the compensatory selection process. So they'll get a third-round pick, but you would like to get a little bit more. And I think this trade might maybe be the best option here for Seattle and for the Cowboys. And
Xavier
Woods, a player that some Cowboys fans try to sell me on as they don't need to get Earl Thomas because they like Xavier Woods as a good young option there. I would not be that mindset. I would immediately trade Xavier Woods for Earl Thomas. And it's a third-round pick as well. And if Dallas wins the NFC, it's a second-round selection. So you're still giving up plenty. You're hedging your bet in case there are injuries and in case that happens where you don't have to lose Earl Thomas. You can still get good value for him in terms of not giving up that much. If you miss playoffs, you're still only giving up a third-round pick, so it ends up being whatever, top 70, top 75 instead of a top 60 pick. If you make the playoffs, you're happy because you're in the playoffs. You have Earl Thomas. You, of course, you sign him to a big long-term deal. As for why you would include Xavier Woods, I like him. There's some upside there, but he kind of becomes repetitive. Why have Xavier Woods when you have Earl Thomas? You don't need him anymore. The Seahawks get a potentially promising young secondary piece. Earl Thomas comes over. He becomes your stud free safety. He gets to go home as they went after he told Jason Garrett to come get him in free agency if the Cowboys.
That's why they're at number one, really, Tom.
Of course they are.
Comes down to that.
It's all Earl Thomas' fault. This was his idea, all right? This now becomes your nickel unit. Jeff Heath is now your strong safety. I feel a lot better about that. Him being your number 2 guy. Kevon Frazier is your number 3 safety. Byron Jones, Cheeto, Jordan Lewis. You're only paying one guy in that secondary anything, Cam. Jones is kind of in his last year of his first deal. He's getting about $6 million. Cheeto is not making that much. Jordan Lewis is not. Jeff Heath is really not either. And if you're wondering about, the Cowboys, do they have enough money? Because they only got like $7 million right now. That's not enough. You would think that, right, Cam?
In theory, yes.
Look at what they have next year. They're going to be sitting before the Zach Martin extension takes effect, $7 or $75 million. They got a lot of money to play with. Now, yes, that includes Tank Lawrence and David Irving and Cole Beasley and Cam Fleming. You can make it work with Earl Thomas. That's why if he hits the open market, Cam, I think he's going to go to Dallas. If he becomes a free agent, I think he ends up with the Dallas Cowboys.
So we got Ryan Stone in the comment section, and I think he's got a good point here. Supply and demand situation. Seattle knows that Dallas really wants Earl Thomas, and Seattle knows that Earl Thomas really wants to be in Dallas. So with that, you ratchet up the price tag, and that's been the problem so far.
Yes, but at the same time, if Earl Thomas only wants to go to Seattle, or if only wants to go to the Cowboys, like for sure, and he won't sign any other contracts with any other team, which I don't think is the case.
One way to put it.
That does drive his value down overall. So that's why some teams didn't make a lot of sense. I think I saw a comment about the Panthers. Where were they on this list? Not every team can actually afford Earl Thomas because it's not really about this year that's the problem. It's going ahead to next year's situation. And a team like the Panthers, they got $25 million. They got enough free agents that it doesn't become all that practical for them to make a big move.
All right, so other teams perhaps that you should monitor out there for Earl Thomas, the Colts, 49ers, Vikings, Packers, Giants. I'll tell you, if he goes to the Vikings, Tom, all bets are off.
I love him with Minnesota, Harrison Smith, unfair tandem there. 49ers would have made a lot more sense if they played in the AFC West.
Very fair.
Seattle will not trade him there. Even I didn't feel that great about putting the Cardinals on there either.
Let's go to 5 through 1 here. We got the Chiefs, the Chargers, the Cardinals, the Texans, and the Dallas Cowboys. So 2 Texas teams atop the list here.
Makes sense.
If there is going to be a deal, it's going to the Dallas Cowboys.
I think so. And I still don't think a deal is all that likely right now. I'll put it at one head. It could come true. But I still think there's a good chance that Seattle says, you know what, we got to keep Earl Thomas, because they want to still have a good defense. But maybe what happens, Cam, I think this is maybe the most likely outcome. Seattle they try to win, and they don't win enough. And they say, you know what, let's go into a full-on rebuild. And they say, cool, let's go from there. Let's set ourselves up in position here. And they let Earl Thomas walk in free agency, and then they get that third-round pick in in exchange via the compensatory draft pick, and then they say, cool, you know what, we tried for this year. I just don't know if a trade is all that likely, Cam.
Okay, so I want folks to weigh in on that. Earl Thomas to the Cowboys this year, or maybe even next year, which I think is obviously the more realistic possibility if Earl Thomas does not sign an extension with the Seattle Seahawks. So be sure to hit us up in the reaction poll here. Seahawks trade Earl Thomas to Cowboys. Who says no? Cowboys, Seahawks, neither team or both teams say no.
Yes, indeed. I think that the Cowboys would say yes. I don't know if Seattle would, though. And that's where I think the distance is. The Seahawks want a lot still for Earl Thomas. And I think